Welcome to Pathways to Prosperity. I'm Deborah Hanson with Washington State University Extension, and I say hello to all of Washington State literally because we have 21 sites across the state joining us for this conference and 542 people. So that's really fantastic because you can meet in a community near you and meet with people that you know and work with. In a town, we have towns from 250 to 250,000. So it works for any size community. We have crowds of people from 2 in small communities to 82 in Lacey, which is our largest site. We have 2 tribes joining us today, the Lummi Nation and the Colville Confederated Tribe. Very excited about everybody being able to join and talk about career-connected learning. So this is a follow-up to the Governor's Summit that we had last spring around career-connected learning. How do we get youth and young adults learning about jobs so they can make choices about careers in their future? So to help you think about new ways to do this in your communities, we're going to have 2 speakers on the webinar. In a little bit, you'll hear from Superintendent Chris Reichdahl to talk about the schools and how they're connected to this. But first, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Brent Parton. Brent is the Deputy Director on Education and Skills for New America, and he'll explain what that organization is and what he does there. But he's been working on work-based learning for the National Governors Association, including Washington State. So he's been in and out of our state a little bit doing work, which we're excited about, and the Department of Labor. So please welcome Brent Parton, and take it away, Brent, and tell us about career-connected learning.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here and hope that everyone can go ahead and see this. But it's really an honor to be able to join you all today from the other Washington. There's some really exciting things going on across the state, and what an exciting topic. Most importantly, it's really an innovative conference that's being pulled together today in a couple ways that I want to just touch on real quick. One, it's really showing the power of networks and what it means for practitioners across the state to be able to connect with one another and talk about best practices and talk about what's going on, but also innovation as well and using technology as a way to forge that connection. Those are 2 themes, both networks and technology, which I'll touch on during my remarks today, as ways or principles that we can apply to creating career-connected opportunities, particularly in our rural communities. First, I want to take just a moment, though, to kick off here and say, what is New America and who am I? I guess you could say it's one of the easier questions to start with, at least from my perspective. New America, we're a nonpartisan think tank headquartered in Washington, D.C., where we work on a range of issues, which of course includes education, but also open technology access, social policy, international security, cybersecurity, a bunch of things. Where I sit is called the Center on Education and Skills, where we focus primarily on strengthening the linkages between learning and work and schools and local economies. So obviously career-connected learning is something that's quite dear to all of the work that we do. But I want to start off today with my remarks on a little bit of a more personal note. As I mentioned, New America is vastly interested in how economic development shapes opportunities for folks in the United States and how that's changed over time. My grandmother was born in a small town in Washington called Morton. Morton was a logging lumber town for generations. Her father, grandfather were both lumberjacks. But really what we knew is back then for essentially centuries, people relied on the natural resources in their
I should have realized
to provide economic opportunity to put food on the table to be able to support their families. By the time she left and headed to Tacoma in the late 1940s to take a job, things were already changing in society. Changes had been underway for a while. Physical infrastructure, the ability to move manufactured goods and services from one place to another, that became really a key thing around economic competitiveness in the several decades following the Second World War. But as that was all coming together, there was even another change afoot as well. The power of people. The power of people is really the drivers of economic development. And that's not to say that both our natural resources as well as our physical infrastructure are not critical to the economic development of our communities. They most certainly are. But we also have to understand that what we are in now is what Economists from Harvard, both Claudia Goltz and Lawrence Katz, call the human capital age. The American century that we say of the 20th century was dominated by Americans' economic primacy, was one of which, where human capital, the skills and abilities of our populations, are the drivers of economic growth. To make that happen requires high quality education, requires people with skills and the abilities to manipulate technologies. This reality has only accelerated over the past, in the recent decades, and will continue to accelerate today. So as we contemplate where we are headed from here, we have to keep this at the back of our minds, that the reason we're having this conversation in the first place is because our people are our greatest economic development asset. Now, of course, that poses both a challenge as well as an opportunity for rural communities. Rural communities are places where there are people, but frankly, less of them, and places also where people are more inclined to leave, to go build skills and find opportunities in other places. At the same time, we argue that because if people, if human capital, if skills are really is what's going to drive economic growth, this is a huge opportunity for areas that may be separated from larger urban settings. Even though urbanization is a process that's continued, this is an opportunity to really distribute more equitably how we think about opportunities for economic growth in the future. And we believe career-connected learning, the idea of equipping our young people with the skills they need to compete, to connect with jobs, is something that we have to be focused on as a key strategy. So that's where we're going to focus our remarks today. So how do we do that? Well, frankly, today, when we think about how young people build skills and we think about where people go apply their skills, really it's what we would call a narrow road. There's really only one main way that we talk today, largely about how young people are going to get the education and skills they need to connect to opportunity. And that's this traditional transition, this idea that after graduating high school, our students need to get some form of post-secondary education in order to build a good career. But really, when we think of what that means, we're thinking in our head of college. The idea that someone graduates from high school and then enters college, goes to college for a number of years, and then ultimately enters the workforce and gets a job. Unfortunately, that natural transition, we know from data, is not working for enough of our young people. Students really have only a narrow option in order to be able to build their post-secondary education and build skills for a career. We know today from the data you're seeing here up in the screen that just over half of our high school graduates that enter college will graduate within 6 years. This is a tremendous challenge, of course, for young people as they accumulate debt and try to seek out opportunities. But we also know, if we just look at sort of the reality around us, we've recognized for quite a while that even getting the degree, for over half of those students that are able to get that degree within 6 years at an affordable cost, that's no guarantee that they're going to connect with the labor market and connect with opportunity. This is an excerpt from an opinion editorial that was done from the president of the Ford Foundation, talking about the importance of work-based learning, what we would call the more hidden drivers of opportunity in our society. If young people aren't also getting the education and skills they need and then applying those in a way that they can build professional networks, that they can demonstrate they have work experience, that's also driving the wedge. So we have to not only think about how we're using post-secondary education for folks to build skills, but how are we creating opportunities for our young people to get exposed and connected to the careers that exist. And right now, both of those things are not working for enough students in our society today. Of course, we know that also the challenges around this narrow road that is not working for enough young people is that it has a challenge for our employers as well. I'm sure any of you out in your communities and the work that you do have heard about the challenge that local employers have finding the skilled talent that they need. This is something that's, of course, recognized nationally as the skills gap. But there's also new research coming out that goes beyond this idea that just there's this mismatch between what the education system is producing and what employers want. This is an excerpt of recent research out of the Harvard Business School that talks about employers actually are suffering bottom line consequences by sitting back and waiting for talent to come to them, hoping they finish college, hoping they come to them, and hoping they find them. We talk about challenges around retention. We talk about unfilled jobs and longer time to hire. All of these are challenges that this new report that came out from Harvard Business School quantifies, and it pushes employers particularly on two ways to remedy these issues. One, engage people younger. Don't wait so long. And the second thing, offer work-based learning, offer opportunities that where you're essentially taking someone that has enough of the basic skills, but you're willing to invest in them and train up. Well, we could debate skills gaps and we could debate whether employers are the ones that are kind of driving inflation in sort of in terms of degrees, in terms of how what types of people are able to access entry-level jobs. One thing we can't argue with is demography. And this is something I know all of you in your communities are quite familiar with, which is that the United States has an aging workforce. We also have a changing workforce. It's becoming a more diverse workforce. And this is something that our employers that are particularly in rural communities have tremendous challenge with. There's another particular challenge that really compounds some of these broader national trends when we look at rural communities, which is that we've known for some time that there's been an issue around retaining young people in rural communities. Again, this pull of going off to school, going off to education, going off and getting to a new job, and not seeing the opportunities that might be in front of them in the places where they grew up. While the data shows us that actually less people are moving to urban areas, it does not mean they're staying in rural areas at this point. And we also know that folks tend to be highly mobile once they go on to post-secondary education. So how can we address kind of this push-pull that is existing in our rural communities today, which is really proving to be a tremendous challenge for the resilience, the economic development of these communities. But at the same time, young people are missing out on the great jobs and opportunities that exist right at home. Is there some way we can kind of connect them? That's where career-connected learning comes in. That's where this idea of if we can get employers and educators as well as other community players to work together to expose young people to the careers that exist, to help them build both the hard and soft skills that employers need early on and not waiting to the end, but also build clear career paths so students can have a clear line of sight that if I take this course here, if I take this experience here, it will get me a career in this field. These are three sort of key things: awareness, skill building, and career pathways. That is what is the essence of what career-connected learning is about. Washington is not the only state in the country that's trying to figure this out. Many states are looking at things like internships, apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job shadows. You've heard all these names before, and many of them are right here on your screen as part of a really elegant framework that your partners at Washington STEM put together, and I encourage all folks to look at. But we have all these different types of programs and experiences and ways that we've heard about young people connecting with employment and career opportunities. But we have not figured out what's a systemic way of scaling them. How do we really count these things? How do we incent them, and how do we build partnerships to make them happen? If we can't figure that out, particularly in our rural communities where the needs are so acute, we're going to have a very hard time being able to connect people with opportunity where they are, and it's just going to continue these patterns towards the concentration of opportunity for certain groups that have certain types of education or people that live in certain types of places. The other thing I want to mention about career-connected learning is that while you can look at this beautiful graphic in front of you and say, well, these are a lot of things we hope our schools could do a lot more of. It's not just about schools. That's what makes career-connected learning different. Schools cannot create these opportunities on their own. Employers have to be at the center of them, which means that they require an actual partnership. One of the areas of career-connected learning that we at New America have done a deep dive with, and I know something that's taken a lot of interest in Washington, is around youth apprenticeship. You go to places like Germany and Switzerland, where you have over half of high school graduating cohorts entering into apprenticeship programs at the ages of 17 and 16. This has become a very systemic way of getting students the career-connected exposure they need. It's not saying they're going to stay in these jobs for life, but these multi-year experiences, rigorous, high-quality experiences, are giving people the skills they need to have over a lifetime. It's teaching them to learn, but it's also getting them the credentials and the work experience they need to maybe stay with that employer if they want, or go to another, or go on to more education. The point is that these career-connected learning opportunities can provide more options, and youth apprenticeship is no exception. But if you look at our pretty little triangle here, what we're trying to say is what makes this hard is that we can't just tell education to do this, and we can't just tell employers to do this. We have to figure out how to make this work as a partnership. And in today's economy, post-secondary is going to be involved. I want to make sure I stress that point, because I know that that's something that has acted as the pull for a lot of rural communities, losing for young people. It's also a capacity constraint. So we'll touch on sort of how different areas have been able to kind of make this work. This youth apprenticeship partnership is, of course, just one type of career-connected learning experience, but it's near what you would call the gold standard. And it's one to say that if you can make these types of partnerships work, you need many other types of experiences that would align with them or build up to them over time. Of course, making work-based learning, career-connected learning, youth apprenticeship, whatever it might be, is a key challenge in rural communities because of some problems that exist that are just contextual. One, we have to acknowledge up front that the capacity in rural communities can be limited. You have fewer employers, you have fewer candidates, and frankly, that often means when we look at sort of everything from funding streams to programs, that means often fewer resources to help coordinate these types of experiences. It's a higher cost per person that participates in these types of programs in a rural setting. There's often longer distances that have to be covered, and there's often some more other barriers that have to be addressed. So of course, distance is a key issue, and the issues around transportation is something tremendously pronounced that I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with. How, if work-based learning or career-connected learning is about a student learning at school, but also going and spending time with an employer, how they get from point A to point B is an existential issue to making that work. Finally is the issue around technology. This is just another example of where here's a potential great solution to help cross those distances. But again, we know from national statistics that rural communities tend to be a disadvantage here as well compared to more concentrated urban districts. But I want to act a little hopeful. These are things you all know about. These are things that you deal with in your work every day, and they're things that you innovate around. And in fact, I would argue because of some of the pressures and tensions that exist in rural communities to do career-connected learning, you do have some assets that are fairly unique. The first and foremost is that the issue of motivated employers. Employers in rural communities tend to be more small and medium-sized employers. They tend to be ones deeply integrated and rooted to the communities that they're in. They also, frankly, just have fewer options than the large corporations that might exist in cities. So you have employers that are particularly motivated for engaging youth, investing in youth, and connecting to youth. That is a tremendous asset when you think about sort of how you make career-connected learning work. The second element that I would want to point out that is a positive for rural communities is this issue around incentives to partner. When we think about sort of how this work gets done, there's a lot of potential players that can be involved. Of course, we've talked about high schools and individual employers. We've talked a little bit maybe about post-secondary and community colleges, workforce development councils, workforce boards, community-based organizations, nonprofits. In rural communities, you don't have as many of these resources to pull upon, which also means they're not always necessarily competing with one another. To make an impact, to make things work, they have different incentives to partner. They can't go in it on their own. And that's something that I encourage you to keep it wind at your back. It's a reality that you know quite well. And then finally, fairly much goes without saying, is that because of the unique challenges that exist for rural communities to make career-connected learning, you have the imperative to innovate. So I want to touch a little bit on sort of how each of these three sort of what could be seen as challenges, but maybe better framed as assets for rural communities have been put to use in some of the other areas around the country, as well as right here in Washington, or right there in Washington, not this Washington. The three things I want to just touch on very quickly here are the difference, the critical difference between big and impact. That's something we want to burn into our heads from a mentality standpoint. It's something that we want to keep at mind when we think about how we partner with the state, how we partner with Washington State, but also it's something we want to keep in mind in how we talk about what the work we do around career-connected learning with our partners. Big numbers does not always mean that you're having a huge impact, and frankly, small numbers doesn't always mean you aren't having a huge impact. The second thing is that rural communities need to be creative with what's there. I want to talk about a couple ways in particular we're seeing career-connected learning being built and using the assets that exist in the community. And finally, again, innovation because it's a necessity. And I'll talk about just a few examples of what innovation means with an inclusive standpoint. So to this first point around high impact doesn't have to mean big. Well, this is something that we know generally from economics, is that when you can connect someone to a good job, that has spillover effects for the broader community. Even creating one high quality career, one job, filling one job posting for one of the smaller medium-sized businesses in your community can have a residual impact on the whole community. Not just the family of the person that gets that job, but also for the economy at large. If the company is able to connect with the talent it needs to compete, whether it's a manufacturer or an agricultural company or something else, then they're going to be able to participate more broadly in the economy. And this is something that is basic, it's something you know, but it's something I think that we lose sight of when we think of sort of the power of the programs that we do. Given in Washington, we know that small and medium-sized businesses are tremendous drivers of hiring and growth. It's something we have to keep in mind is that even if one employer is approaching an education institution with a problem, it doesn't mean, of course, that that education institution is going to be able to change everything it does in order to meet that one employer's needs. But it has to understand that doing something, finding some sort of partnership, some sort of way to work with that employer and maybe some of the other employers in the community can have a more profound impact. High impact also doesn't have to mean big in terms of sort of how the programs are designed themselves. In fact, two of the examples I just want to hit on real quickly demonstrate that. In Wisconsin, for over 20 years, they've run a statewide youth apprenticeship program. It serves this year about 4,000 youth apprentices a year. That's a small number compared to the numbers of high school and juniors and seniors throughout Wisconsin. But about half of those 4,000 are actually from communities that would be considered rural or ex-urban communities, meaning not urban or suburban areas, which means a lot of these regional partnerships that operate under this program are actually operating not with huge numbers, but the thing is the program's been going for 20 years. And the program's been going for 20 years because the small employers that benefit from this, as well as the students that have gotten jobs and gone on to great futures because of these programs, every year are able to advocate on the program's behalf. Yes, no one company is really taking more than 1, 2, 3 apprentices at a time, particularly in these areas. But we have to keep in mind that that doesn't mean that does not have value to the employer partners involved, and it doesn't mean that is not a reason why they will become some of your best advocates for making these career-connected learning experiences work. Another example is right here close at home, the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee. I want to be clear, there's a big vision here and a big thing to drive. But the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Program, or AJAC, Youth Apprenticeship Program, started out in Tacoma and Pierce County, and it's now spread to several communities, including Yakima. And what this apprenticeship program is, it's a machining apprenticeship program. The one, for example, in Yakima is a partnership between the school district as well as Yakima Valley Community College. And what AJAC does is play this intermediary role, brokering a partnership between the students and the employers that are able to participate in this really high quality program and get great results. Not more than a handful of apprentices are participating in any one of the different sites at this point. It's maybe a little more over 10, but probably under 20 in most of the places. And AJAC will check my data on that. I don't want to dig it up for you at the moment. But the point is that high impact solutions can be highly networked across areas. The Wisconsin Youth Apprenticeship Program is not big in any one of the locations that it operates in, but because it operates in this decentralized network statewide, it has a bigger impact over time. AJAC really has the same potential, working from community to community, but it's an approach that can really be replicated and built on as other regions come on board. Moving on to the second point around how we creatively leverage our community assets, there's just two broad points I want to touch on here. We have to understand that there are tremendous economic opportunities in all of our rural communities, and there's great examples of apprenticeship programs, including the National Rural Water Association's Registered Apprenticeship Program. It operates in 8 states across the country, largely in rural areas, as well as Idaho's Magic Valley Registered Apprenticeship Program, another great example of here you have a profound acute need in some of the most rural areas in the United States, and they've been able to build out these apprenticeship programs for young people because the acute need was there in those industries. We can't think of career-connected learning or any one type of learning as something that's reserved just for manufacturing, just for the building trades, or just for IT. Every employer has a profound skills challenge, and career-connected learning can help any employer meet those challenges. One program is going on, SkillSource, the EcoSteward program, something that's been coordinated by SkillSource on behalf of the North Central Workforce Development Council. It's a really exciting program for out-of-school youth, and I encourage you to connect with your colleagues that are logged on from that region to talk about it. But they partner with many employers across the area to create opportunities for high school dropouts to come together, do some teamwork, build network building, and then doing long-term internships. This is something that has been an example of what's been supported by the Career Connect grants throughout the state. And it's a really cool program, and it's one, again, that can be easily networked from place to place. We also should not just be thinking about how we can craft pathways, though, for every individual employer, every individual sector. The way that we look at what jobs are today, and particularly you can look at information technology, is something that is not reserved for any one type of employer. For example, in our rural communities, many of our different types of employers have information technology needs. one of the coolest programs I've seen in Wisconsin is an information technology program on a dairy farm. We're seeing that same thinking being put together here in Washington as well. The South Central Workforce Development Council, for example, is looking at how to meet critical IT workforce needs across agriculture, warehousing, logistics, irrigation, to inspection. Understanding that maybe these employers are performing different functions to some extent, but if you're creating an IT pathway, many employers in a rural community can benefit from that. So that's something that necessarily we need to be thinking about, is that if you want to create IT jobs, we can do that across many employers from many different types of sectors at once. In terms of the other point I want to make around how we leverage community assets, it's important to also understand that we have even though we might be operating in a rural context, we all have education and workforce resources to draw upon, even if they might look small in comparison to maybe some of our urban counterparts. But that doesn't mean we don't have, in fact, we have to be creative in terms of how we use those resources. You hear, I'm sure, terms like braid, blend, share. There's so many different federal or state funding streams that come into communities. And of course, the flexibility to be able to use these resources in creative ways to support people is something that has been subject of mine for a while. It was the focus of a project that functioned over the past 2 years called Rural Impact. Rural Impact was a 10-site demonstration project in rural communities, supporting what are called two-generation strategies, where rural communities built these partnerships to figure out how can we use our health resources, our child care resources through programs like Head Start, as well as our workforce development resources, and braid and weave them together to serve both our young folks, if they have young children, both at once. And this is just an example. There's a tremendous amount of lessons learned about all the different types of federal funding streams that many of your workforce development councils will be quite familiar with. I encourage you to reach out to them. And there's a lot of lessons learned. So please check out the Rural Impact Project to figure out how rural communities have particularly had the incentives to innovate in this space. Again, you don't have to look nationally here as well. Wenatchee, which is not a, this is not a workforce two-generation strategy, it's one focused on youth. And Wenatchee Connect is a program that's really exciting that I got the chance to learn about. What's happening there, essentially the school district is able to work with the Chamber of Commerce to create a range of career-connected learning experiences for youth. The key top line of this is that you want success in this work on career-connected learning. We know, particularly in a rural context, you can have the luxury to be independent. You have to operate as a partnership. My final point here around sort of strategies is this importance of leading on innovation, but having to do it out of necessity, which is not always a luxury that folks have. We know when we think of innovation, I know we often think of technology, and the truth is technology can be a huge asset for overcoming some of the key challenges that rural communities face, particularly covering geographic distances. One of those rural impact projects was located in Nebraska, where they've used computer programming called Second Life, which is essentially a simulation program to create simulated work environments for rural students to be able to understand what it's like to job shadow, to participate, to work on a line in a high-tech advanced manufacturing facility without being able to drive there. Then again, though, technology is not the only way we can innovate. You can actually do this same simulation of career-connected learning, simulating what it means to be in a career-based setting and demonstrating the skills that someone has to be career-ready. For example, in West Virginia, they've been able to run something that was profiled in the New York Times not so recently. It's another article I would encourage folks to check out, where they're actually running student-run enterprises throughout their high schools. And these are sophisticated things where students have everything from a punch card. They have paid time off where they have to sort of take vacation, or they have to go get certain things done. They have set hours. They're running businesses out of their schools. And in some cases, they're getting paid for it, actually. And so it's an exciting type of creative way of where in West Virginia, they've been able to create the environment, the conditions for students to demonstrate that they're building the skills that it means to connect with the job. In Montana, this is another example of innovation that might not be tech intensive. They have these rural EMS units, EMT units, emergency medical technician units across the state. These were things that were actually originally, these units were sent out to help train rural hospital staff. Someone got wind of it and basically said, well, why don't we, instead of just focusing on training the hospital staff, why can't we use these same units to also be able to train young people and get them exposures to the careers? So this was a great asset that was being used for a completely different supporting rural health. They were able to transform into career-connected learning experience for college students and now high school students across the state of Montana. And the last thing I want to say is, even without assets and even without technology, innovation is still something that we can keep top of mind. When we think about sort of how you innovate, there's really exciting things going on in terms of thinking of how do we build cohorts of people, for example. This is something that's been going on in education for a long time, but especially when you have long distances where people are trying to travel from training area to training area or from place to place, to be able to get access and exposure to not only careers, but the education they need. How do you come together as a program and build a cohort and try to aggregate people at once? Then you can think about creative transportation solutions. We've heard of places using busing, for example, from the school district or other types of solutions to be able to move people not as a group, not as sort of individual folks participating in a program, but really trying to build a group, building the group spirit, but also just making it logistically easier to move people from site to site to make career-connected learning work. So to wrap up here, a couple things I just want to leave you with that is a blend of recap as well as sort of ideas for the future and next steps. The one thing, of course, we want to be able to drive home is that the people in your community are the ones that are going to drive economic development in this century. In that sense, workforce development is economic development, which means that we need to do everything we can to develop the skills of young people. They are the greatest asset. That's something that is why you're all here talking, but I would just want to make sure it's reinforced. To make career-connected learning work requires sharing of resources. That means you have to be able to engage in partnerships and think creatively on these fronts, and that is such a pronounced thing for rural communities. I really encourage you to work with your workforce development councils across the state. You're all a part of some region in the workforce development region. They have so much experience at these councils just figuring out how to blend, braid, share, and do all this creative stuff that's sometimes needed to make these partnerships work. Third is the power of networks. That's what we're doing today. We're here talking with folks, but also, again, on this challenge around big versus impact. If we can create small, high-impact solutions in our communities, how can we make sure that the way of doing that is networked from community to community to make sure that we're replicating it? The final point here is one that is so important and also comes down to why we're here today, is that making all this work really does require a partnership between state, regions, and locals. And the thing I'll say from my experience as an observer or participant to some extent in some of the work Washington's doing, Washington has tremendously motivated partners at the state level to support action on the ground, and I really encourage you to engage and be part of that. One area in particular I want to point to is Career Connect Washington. As you all know, Governor Inslee has made Career Connect learning one of his priorities, put together a task force back when he launched the initiative. He put out a series of grants many of you in your regions have been able to take advantage of. Building on the experience of that task force, building on the experience of this grant, the Career Connect Washington effort has really entered a new and exciting stage. They're thinking big, they're thinking long-term, and they're thinking about a 10-year vision that's really supposed to enable and create a system that overcomes some of these barriers that might stand in our way to creating high-quality career-connected learning experiences. And the two I'll just mention off the bat, how do we engage industry at scale and make sure industry statewide knows what this is all about, what the vision is, and how they can partner with folks on the ground? And the second thing is they really want to think about how do we make sure that it's not the hard thing to do, but rather the easy thing to do to create career-connected learning experiences for youth that they can take advantage of. We're learning in a classroom, learning in a workplace, and building the skills and post-secondary education experience they need to have a sustainable life and a prosperous life. The thing I'll say is that the Career Connect Washington effort, the strategy development effort, wants to hear from you. I know during all the evaluation forms you'll all receive at the end of this, you'll get a series of questions up to that point. And I would encourage you to share just a few things with them and be as comprehensive as you can. They're in listening mode. They want to hear about not only what's working on the ground today in your communities, but what are those barriers that a statewide system would really need to address to overcome. And most importantly, what should they really take into account to make sure that rural communities are not at a disadvantage, but rather empowered and enabled to participate and create these opportunities for their students and deliver for the employers, but more importantly, the communities at large, to make sure that these are places that we will be there for generations more to come. On that note, I will thank you and now take a moment to introduce another great partner you have at the state level who's been engaged with the Career Connect Washington effort, but of course on a broader number of things. And that's Chris Reichdahl. He's your state superintendent of public instruction. I've had the opportunity to hear him speak before. It's exciting stuff that's going on at OSPI. They're doing a lot of great things, and you've got a great partner at the state level, but I'll let him talk to you a little bit about that. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon, folks. I hope it's coming through pretty clear for you. I may have my head chopped off here a little bit, but I think you get the gist of my message here in terms of a visual capture. Thank you for being a part of this around the state. I'm here in sunny Yakima right now as part of the State Board of Education meeting, but I've had a chance to take an hour out here and be a part of this. Brett really set out, I think, a really great framework that is so consistent in our state with respect to the challenges and the opportunities that he sees across the country from his vantage point. I want to offer a little more Washington specific information that is both, I think, hopeful, but also establishes the challenges. I know our audience is really diverse. There are business partners out there, there are community members, educators, there's all kinds of folks out there. And so I'll leave my messages broad enough for you to sort of take into your community and then figure out how to strategize around solutions. Because some of what I'll present, I think, is a real challenge to business to operate differently with education, and a real challenge to educators in our K-12 system to think differently about how they engage business partners. So let's go specific to Washington State here on some of the numbers. And some of you have heard me say this before. The greatest workforce certificate known to mankind, certainly to this country and candidly to the rest of the country as they come to grips with this, is the high school diploma. We need a really robust conversation about post-high school opportunities, and that's mostly what we've talked about. But sometimes we forget that the biggest barrier to employment and to meaningful employment is the high school diploma itself. We make a presumption that that's now behind us and that's under our belt, but for 20% of our students, they never actually get to that place. For about another 20 or 25% of students, they do get a high school diploma, but they don't engage in anything post-secondary. So that's getting to be 40, 45% of our students who will never really engage in a meaningful industry recognized credential, an associate degree, a technical degree, a baccalaureate degree or higher. And you've heard the numbers. We have to have those numbers look very dramatically different over time. We're thinking in the range of 30% or so need baccalaureate degrees or higher, and another probably 65, 70% that will need more than a high school diploma, but less than a bachelor's degree. And that's a profound message, because I didn't leave any room for high school dropouts in there, because the economy eats them alive. The competitiveness of the state is yes, a function of how many software engineers and aerospace engineers we have, but we're also only as strong as our weakest link. And right now, when we have so many young people who still don't get to that place where they have sort of the ultimate glass ceiling broken, which is the high school diploma, it holds us all back. They lose economic opportunity. We're constantly struggling on retraining when they've sort of re-engaged much later in life with lots of struggle, generally lots of personal debt, sometimes substance abuse issues, and all kinds of things that strongly correlate with a lack of education. So I never want to leave folks with the belief that this is about launching into post-secondary without recognizing we still have a lot of work to do just to get students a diploma. And I think it's a hopeful message, because we're getting better every year. We're about ready to approach 80% high school diploma rate in 4 years. We'll now track 5, 6, and 7-year rates, and you'll see those being at about 82, 83, 84% after 5 years or so. That's a positive thing, but again, I want you to stay focused on that. So how do we scale some of this stuff? I think that's really a powerful message Brent leaves us. When he shows me examples of West Virginia and Wisconsin and places all around the country, it reminds me of the travels that I get to do in this job, meeting with my peers across the United States, the U.S. Department of Education, all kinds of other folks. Everyone's got something. And I think a lot of times we're looking for that silver bullet, that magic thing that changes everything. It doesn't exist. What we have are lots of communities struggling in their own way or succeeding in their own way. And as Brent indicated, it's really about partnerships. So I hope after today you leave with the idea that there isn't some magical thing that we're going to achieve at the state level or the local or the federal level that suddenly makes this problem solved. It is a constant effort locally to engage in strategies to get youth connected to work, completed in school, and on a pathway to success. So I take heart in that, because it means individually in my community, I can make a difference, I can take charge, and I can solve some local problems without necessarily believing we have to solve it overnight with some single policy or program. couple of things that I would encourage the business community to double down on if they aren't already. Every one of our career and tech ed programs in our school system and in our community and technical college system, quite frankly, has an advisory board. And sometimes those are, less than amply sort of engaged. And I know the partners in K-12 and higher ed are always looking for folks in industry to come in. And it's got a lot of benefits. Not only does it, of course, inform the program so that industry is making clear communication about the expectations in a very dynamic, rapidly changing labor market, but also that business gets the benefit of seeing what the institutions are producing by way of talent, their challenges by way of equipment, programming, how hard it is at times to connect the opportunity for young people to work and get credit in high school and sometimes get credit in college. These are things we're building out, but they're really hard to do if you don't see them directly. So I want to really encourage any of the folks in the 21 sites who is a part of the business or nonprofit community to think very seriously about serving on an advisory committee. It is the fastest way you can change programming in our schools. Be a mentor. We have great examples in communities all around the state. I think the Methow Valley and the superintendent there does one of the best jobs of essentially pairing every student in that school system with a mentor in the region. Those students spend real time on the job sites of those mentors, sometimes being paid because they take on minimum wage jobs or beginning and training wage. Most of the time, though, not paid, just understanding how they connect their academic work to the very real world of running a business or running a nonprofit or trying to survive the seasonality of tourism in that valley, or the seasonality of just seasons. It's awfully hard to be in construction in the Methow Valley in winter, but that's part of being a business owner is you got to figure out how to feed yourself, and connecting students to that through mentorship is really powerful. They get a real sense in those communities that their learning goes somewhere and it has real world consequences if they don't think about many aspects outside of just the content for purposes of passing assessments and maybe even getting a diploma or a certificate. They got to start thinking about it in the context of real world. That said, we've heard loud and clear from the business community over the last year and a half about how they want us to balance a little better in our accountability system for schools, the softer skills, the employment skills. And so our state, for the first time in our history, has now got an achievement index where we measure every single school in the state, from the kindergarten to second grade school, all the way to the comprehensive high school. Every school gets a score now. And one of the variables that's in there is chronic absenteeism, or stated in the positive, good attendance. We want schools to be thinking about those kinds of skills for all students, not just a CT conversation, but all students. And so it's part of the metric now. And again, we balance these things pretty carefully. The emphasis is still very much on basic skill building in math and science and English language arts. But chronic absenteeism is one of those now. And it's generally about 5% or so of a high school scoring metric. But as a business partner, you should be asking your local school district, what are you doing to work on soft skills? I know attendance at a minimum and the importance of showing up and being on time is a part of your measurement system. What else are you doing in soft skills? That's a very legitimate question to ask our schools. Host a class or a CTSO, career and technical service organization. All of our CTE programs and the students who are trying to connect to work have a leadership component where they try to take their learning and bring it into their community. Most of you know the prime example is FFA, where those students are so engaged in community fairs, local business organizations. They're taking their learning, they're applying it, they're presenting it to community partners. They're having to demonstrate knowledge and understanding by teaching. And that is the most powerful tool we have. But all of our CTE programs, from our healthcare side to our skills side, construction trades, all of them have these organizations. Host them. Bring them into your business, even if it's for an hour or 4 hours. It is a world of difference for them to be able to see some of their work in action and to have you tell them the real skills you need, because it'll shape the way they learn and the way we teach things. Host interns, if you can pay them, great, but it's a tangible way to capture the labor market before that future worker leaves the community, thinking that the only pathway is the one Brent described in the beginning of his presentation. This sort of university for all model doesn't work. And candidly, it's never actually been that way, but the rhetoric gets so powerful about it that you begin to see families believing that the only way to economic success is a bachelor's degree and a traditional 4-year pathway. We need more bachelor's degrees. Never discount that. But it doesn't mean we need everybody getting that. We need 70% of people to get more than a high school diploma, less than a bachelor's degree. And I just think it's very important if you can get them on the job early, even while they're in high school, you increase the probability they'll stay in the community and they'll grab their higher education credits or their industry certification pathways within the community. Pre-apprenticeship, obviously the governor's got the massive effort going on. You've been engaged in that. It is such a game changer for our state if we do this very, very well. Obviously, something like this takes private sector partners. And I think sometimes the energy feels like it's large employers in the Puget Sound, and certainly it has to be them in partnership. But as this evolves, and I know the governor's team is really serious about legislative activity this session, budget and policy, that will expand that opportunity to more rural and remote communities. Because career-connected learning and youth apprenticeship doesn't have to take place in a 50,000 employee organization. It can take place at the local manufacturer or the local food processor with 1 student or 2 students. It is a tremendous model, and I'd encourage you to be a part of that. Donate equipment. I know that's really hard, and I know there isn't always the financial incentive to do that. So I'd love to figure out some strategies with policymakers to make it easier for you to do that, either to our K-12 system, our comprehensive high schools, our skill centers, or even our community or technical colleges. They can always use equipment donations. If you think the long life of that industry, that sector, or that particular skill still has viability on that equipment. I know it sounds small, but it's a big darn deal, because most of our schools are not funded to go out and replace a $50,000 piece of equipment in machining or something else. So do what you can to figure out where you have physical assets that can be moved to our schools. That would be helpful. And then partner with them on grants. If you're in the business community, I cannot reiterate enough for you how many of our schools seek grants that are not formula driven. So they come to us for Perkins grants. We have IT grants. We now have equipment grants, thanks to the legislature. We have very specific ways for every one of your communities to plug into new resources, and we'll try to grow those. But the most successful applicants are those who partner with industry. So when you're at the table signing the letter, committing to hosting interns, or committing to equipment donations or matches, or you're bringing expertise, or you're serving on a advisory committee of a particular program, that increases the strength of that application, and it's much more likely to drive very specific resources into your community. To schools, I'll say this: get more flexible in your schedules. This is the state superintendent talking, and so a lot of you are shaking your head saying, we'd love to, buddy, but that legislature is eating us alive with 24 credit diplomas and high stakes exams. We are going to keep working on this. If I can take a little sidebar for you all who are not in education, I'll reiterate something I've said before in some of these networks. Our state is absolutely unsettled on what we really want. We've spent 130 years thinking it's all about seat time, and we still have that. Students must learn 1,000 hours of instruction. But we're not sure if it's about days, so we also have a rule that you have to be in school for 180 days, or you need a waiver from that. But then we also had this era enter 20 years ago where we said, maybe it's not about seat time and days, it's really about competency. So let's make sure we have exams tied to our standards, so we have a high confidence that students are meeting proficiency goals and growing, but we never let go of the seat time. So now you still have to have 1,000 hours and 180 days and an exam-based approach. And I think it's a little bit maddening, because I think it's taking away flexibility of local schools to connect with the labor market, to partner with businesses to say, if we produce a student who's passionate about your industry and they want to work there and they have the skills, we should be good to go. And I think we're getting closer, but I'm a little worried that we're still denying high school diplomas to kids who are absolutely ready for those connections, but they can't get over that Algebra 2 based, sort of high stakes exam. We have made progress. That test is going to 10th grade this year. It gives us 2 years to react. We have multiple pathways students can choose when they struggle on sort of the specific academic test. And then I have a waiver process that was granted to me where students can essentially partner with their school and say, I've met my local requirements, I've done my 1,000 hours, I did my 180 days, I got all my credits. The only thing in my barrier is this test, but I'm already in higher ed, or I'm already in a training program, or I'm already employed and getting a specific training from a employer. We can then grant the high school diploma and break that glass ceiling. I need that to be permanent. So if I have a request out here today, I actually have 2 or 3, but one of them is partner with us to make that waiver permanent going forward. It gave 500 students a high school diploma who were already on to post-secondary opportunities last year, but ironically would not have gotten a high school diploma even though they're in college coming this year. So we've got some things to settle. Host businesses and organizations. Our K-12 system has to do a better job reaching out to business leaders and nonprofit organizations saying, come in, see what we do, tell us how to do it better. So it is about recruiting to advisory committees, but it's also about just bringing them in and letting them see programming and let them meet with students so that that exchange of interest is met there. Beef up regional skills centers. I know there's always a financial risk of sending students to a place where you also give away your money. But for many, many communities, they can't afford comprehensive career and tech programs, or if they do, they're on a very small scale. We want to keep building CTE resources, and we've got a little roadblock there in the way the legislature now counts hours, so we've got to overcome that. But I also want to figure out the financial incentives for more of you to send your students physically or remotely to regional training models so that you don't feel like you have to mount the entire program A to Z, but that you can find regional scale on some of these things. Obviously, embrace the CTSO activities. Most of you do a great job of that, but some students are still struggling to find ways to show and demonstrate leadership when it's not one of those traditionally large CTSO models. Support statewide equivalencies. So our state has worked really hard, but mostly these local one-to-one relationships where a student says, I really want to be in a program, let's call it construction trades or something in ag sciences. They take coursework and we work out these local relationships. And by we, I mean you. Often we'll say the student has done enough work and they've demonstrated enough skill building in a particular area that not only are they going to get construction trades credit, but we're going to give them a math credit for that because they're applying geometry concepts in construction. And sometimes we go the next step and we have a relationship with a local college who will say, you know, we'll exempt them from an introductory course here, which can be a real financial savings. What we don't have in place very effectively yet are statewide equivalencies. When a student in Yakima can take a construction trades course and get a 5-credit class waived or paid for, if you will, at the same time at local community college Yakima, that should be equivalent everywhere. Our students are mobile and these skills are so finite now and measurable that it's beginning to get a little absurd that one college will take it and another one will not. Our community college system within its own network has been working on these equivalencies for a very long time for purposes of transferring students to universities and ensuring that the universities will take all that credit. Now we've got to back that system up and make sure that our high schools are working on statewide equivalencies. When we do it, it's going to be so much easier because when we map one of them out and we offer statewide equivalency, all the rest of them do not have to reinvent the wheel and waste resources and taxpayer money trying to, again, do their own thing. They can simply adopt the statewide equivalencies, and we think that has huge potential. Support more dual credit. Work really hard with higher ed if you're in the K-12 system to offer more credit in CTE. This has a parallel request of me to you. Take seriously the high school and beyond planning. Students think about careers far earlier than we ever imagined. And it doesn't mean we pigeonhole them or track them. It means we let them explore. So our new mandate for middle school, high school, and beyond planning is very, very powerful. We will get to the legislature this year and we will make it one of our top priorities to get you more counselors and career connected folks and parent outreach coordinators to do this work. But we have to do this in order to really electrify students and make them understand how many opportunities there are, particularly in rural Washington, that doesn't mandate them going to the Puget Sound necessarily for employment. This is part of opening their eyes and bringing in the community to help them understand it. But it also means more dual credit. You got to have ways for them to earn credit while they're juniors and seniors, and sometimes even earlier, because the more credit they amass in the community, the more likely they are to find a local option to complete. And that's very powerful given that we have 34 community and technical colleges around the state that are more geographically distributed than our universities. You know some of the great examples out there, of course, West Valley Core Plus, we've talked about it a lot. Great partnership. You have You have urban districts with large aerospace interests that are building big aerospace programs, and you have rural communities who have 2 or 5 or 10 students. It all matters. It all matters because that particular industry is so distributed. There are suppliers all over the state. And we could say that about marine, we can say that about manufacturing, allied healthcare, agriculture. They are so distributed that we've got to think about this as a community. It's okay to train somebody in Yakima or somebody in Pend Oreille County who ends up working in Spokane or ends up working in Seattle and Bellevue, because I promise you somebody in Whatcom County today is working that's going to end up in Ellensburg or the Tri-Cities or Wenatchee. So we do have to think a little bit about some of these statewide organizations being true community approaches. Tonight, I know Oak Harbor, I can name you dozens of schools who've focused on tiny homes, not because the entire world needs to live in 20 square feet or 40 or 400 square feet, but the skills we teach kids in those programs, they are applicable to life and they are applicable to other industries. There are basic process manufacturing elements to that and basic planning tools and relationships and communications and financial elements that transition and apply everywhere. So even something as small as building tiny homes that you donate to the homeless, or you quite frankly auction off as a fundraiser, or you help in migrant farm worker housing, all of the skill building that occurs there is powerful. And so I'd say if you don't have anything in your community, start there. Start with something small like that. Kashmir is winning awards for environmental sciences and CTE. Chelan said community. We've got 40 wineries in our community. We are becoming this booming tourism destination for wineries and hospitality. So their high school has started a viticulture and enology program. They just flat out invented it with partners in industry. They're awesome. I got a chance to visit them this week. They're partnered with 2 wineries. Students spend time on the job, in the vineyards, in the process and bottling facilities, and in traditional classrooms. They're getting their CTE credit and science credit at the same time. This is the kind of stuff we're doing everywhere. I talked about Metal. There are examples everywhere. Go after the resources. Perkins dollars, state dollars, equipment dollars. The Microsoft IT Academy, in my opinion, is one of the greatest things we've ever partnered on in the state. Every student should leave high school certified in something Microsoft, because it is the business software that still drives productivity in our state, in the country, and in the world. And so that at a minimum, if you're not engaged in that, you should be doing some of that work. A couple of challenges for me, I'll just be honest about. I need to keep building out certifications and figuring out ways for students to get an industry recognized credential. That means a partnership with industry to sit down and map out what those competencies are, but we can never have enough of that as long as it leads to something else. We don't want terminal certificates that don't transfer or move, but we're getting better at that. We obviously want more paid opportunities. So employers, pretty record economy right now, great GDP growth right now, a little bit of disposable income. As long as we have a percentage of our students who have to work anyways, let's figure out a way to get them enough tangible learning connected to our outcomes that we can also give them high school credit for that learning. Our staff estimates that our students earned over $3 million last year directly with employers who also have a connection to schools, so that the student earns credit while they're earning a wage. We need more of that. Big employers, medium and small. If you've got young people working for you, we want to figure out how to get them high school credit. That may increase their hours with you and certainly makes the learning more connected, and we want to do that. And I'll pause right there. I know there may be questions. I'll also tell you, we're going to go after those counselors really aggressively. So if you can help us with that in your advocacy, that'd be great. But I know, Deborah, I'm turning it back to you, and there may be questions from folks, but I just really want to conclude with a big thank you for the opportunity. Great modality here in this. And if nothing else, I hope you understand that we recognize in the state of Washington that learning occurs everywhere, connection to industry can happen everywhere, and we are more than a 3-county economy. We are a 39-county economy that deserves the attention in every community, and we're going to keep working very, very hard at that. And there are new ways we can do it in ways we never imagined. So thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brent and Superintendent Reichdahl. The passion and interest in helping us do this kind of work in our rural communities and in our urban communities that are nearby is fabulous. And you've given us a lot to think about. For those of you out at the sites, I hope you learned something or that feeds your local conversations, because the rest of the time is for you to reinforce those partnerships that both Brent and Chris mentioned. on how do you strengthen those local projects and those local relationships. So the Brent's PowerPoint and the slide deck from Career Connected Washington that talks about that 10-year plan will be put on the webinar this afternoon. And then we'll also have a link to this webinar if you want other people to watch it, or if it's so engaging that you want to watch it again, that would be fabulous. You will be receiving an evaluation that will include those 3 questions that Brent showed from the Career Connect Washington, so that you can give feedback at your location and in your community that can help drive the initiative forward. I just want to say thank you to the planning team that pulled this together, for every site manager, every site facilitator, every site technical coordinator, our 2 speakers, and everybody that made this happen. So good luck with your conversations and good luck with your Career Connected Washington.